Winston thought Stella was just a poor, useless daughter-in-law. What he didn't know was that she had spent years secretly cleaning up his company's financial disasters as an anonymous risk analyst. She knew about the hidden debt. She knew about the offshore accounts. She knew about the fake projects, stolen investor money, and tax fraud. So when they humiliated her in public, they weren't just attacking a wife. They were provoking the one woman who held every document needed to bury their empire.
On our 5th anniversary, my father-in-law shamed me before 500 guests. He called me a charity case with a grease monkey father. When he exposed his massive tax fraud, my husband slapped me. I didn't cry. I wiped the blood away and called the man they thought was a low-level mechanic. Dad, I said, come destroy them. Before I finish, tell me where you are watching from. Hit subscribe if you love watching arrogant people get served. I am Maya, 33. For 5 years, I was married to Julian, a partner at a massive Chicago real estate firm. Outside, my life looked perfect, an ordinary girl who married into extreme wealth. But behind the doors of our Lincoln Park mansion, I was treated like a parasite. My father-in-law, Arthur, was a ruthless mogul who demanded worship. He hated my simple clothes. He hated my old sedan. Most of all, he hated my father, who preferred grease, Elias, stained coveralls, and tinkering with vintage truck engines. Arthur thought we were uneducated trash, begging for handouts. He had no idea my father was actually a legendary private equity titan. They didn't know he controlled billions, living off-grid to escape the city's toxicity. They certainly didn't know I was the sole heir to a massive trust. I hid my wealth to find genuine love. Instead, I spent 5 years being abused by fragile narcissists who measured human worth strictly by designer labels and country club fees. Tonight was the breaking point. We sat at the head table in the Grand Hotel ballroom. 500 influential investors and socialites watched under sparkling chandeliers. Waiters poured vintage champagne as we celebrated Arthur's company and our anniversary sorority. I sat quietly in my black dress, staring at my napkin. The room felt suffocating. My husband, Julian, ignored me completely, laughing at a cruel joke from his sister, Chloe. Chloe wore a diamond necklace cost a fortune. I knew she bought it with funds stolen from employee health benefits. I knew because I fixed the counting mess. For years, I worked anonymously as a high-level financial consultant. Arthur and Julian never guessed the brilliant analysts they hired to clean their books was their despised daughter-in-law. I worked 80-hour weeks hiding their zoning violations and restructuring their toxic debt just to keep their lifestyle afloat. They treated me like dirt, oblivious that my financial models kept them out of federal prison. A silver spoon clinked against a glass, silence in the crowd. Arthur stepped to the podium, radiating decades of arrogant authority. He adjusted his silk tie and leaned in. Thank you all for coming, he boomed. Tonight, we celebrate the success of our real estate empire. But we also celebrate my son, Julian. 5 years ago, Julian performed an act of charity. My stomach twisted. I knew exactly what was coming. Arthur smirked at me with pure condescension. Julian married Maya, he said, his voice dripping with venom. A girl burdened with debt. A girl raised by a mechanic who reeks of motor oil. Julian brought her into our world of privilege. Let us applaud my son for his incredible generosity to the less fortunate. Cruel laughter rippled through the room. Chloe let out a piercing giggle. Julian puffed his chest, soaking up the praise as if he had rescued a stray dog. He didn't defend his wife. I sat frozen, humiliation burning my cheeks, but my anger was hotter. I looked at the hundreds of wealthy faces staring at me with amusement. I thought about the nights I spent crying, while Julian belittled my career, and the panic attacks I suffered fixing Arthur's fraudulent ledgers. I had sacrificed my peace to protect people who viewed me as a punchline. Arthur raised his glass. To our flawless business acumen, he declared, to our untouchable family name. That was the moment the accommodating wife died. I decided to burn their fake empire down. I pushed my chair back, the legs screeching against the marble floor. I stood up, grabbing my glass. Every eye turned my way. Julian grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging in. "Sit down and shut up," Julian hissed. "You are embarrassing me." He yanked my arm away and looked straight at Arthur. My voice was calm and perfectly clear. "Flawless business acumen, Arthur?" I asked. His confident smile vanished, his face turning a blotchy red. "What are you doing?" he barked. "Sit down." I took a step forward so everyone could see me. "Is that what we call the $12 million tax discrepancy I buried for you last month?" I asked, loud enough for the front row. "Is that we call the offshore accounts used to hide your massive losses? If not for risk analysis, you hired fraudulent managers, you hired to fix your fraudulent ledgers. Federal agents would be seizing this hotel right now." The room erupted into chaos. Investors whispered frantically. Chloe dropped her wine glass in shock. Arthur stood frozen, mouth agape, recognizing the specific financial figures I was quoting. The realization hit him like a train. The anonymous consultant who knew his secrets was the daughter-in-law he had just humiliated. The silence was suffocating. I watched Arthur grip the podium, his knuckle white. He looked like a terrified old man, not a mogul. He could not even form a sentence. He knew I was telling the absolute truth about the offshore accounts and that $12 million figure. The elite investors understood the gravity of my statement. Men loosened their ties and whispered to associates. Wives clutched their pearls in panic. The pristine image of Arthur's empire was shattering right before their eyes. Julian realized the damage unfolding. His inheritance and his ego were being destroyed by the woman he thought was just an accessory. His face twisted into pure rage. He shoved his chair back and it crashed to the floor. He stormed from the head table, boots thundering against the floor. He marched right at me, fists balled tight. I held my ground, chin up, refusing to flinch. 5 years of shrinking mice to boost his ego. Over. Julian grabbed my shoulder, digging his nails in hard enough to bruise. He spun me around, scanning the room to protect his precious image. He plastered on a fake, shaky smile for the investors. "Excuse my wife. Everyone," he yelled over the murmuring crowd. "She has been struggling with some mental health issues lately. She is having a breakdown. She has no idea what she is saying. We will get her the she needs. We will get her the care she needs." I looked him dead in the eye. "I am not having a breakdown, Julian," I said, voice steady. "I am the anonymous senior analyst your father hired to save this sinking ship. I have every financial document backed up on a secure server. I have the emails. I have the forged signature logs. The federal authorities will love this." The reality hit him hard. Knowing his submissive wife, financial's wife, was actually the financial genius behind his company sent him over the edge. Julian raised his hand and swung with brutal force. His palm cracked across the side of my face. The sickening sound of skin on skin echoed through the ballroom. The violence of the blow threw me off balance. My vision flashed white. I stumbled back and crashed onto my knees against the cold marble. My legs burned from the impact, but the sting on my cheek was worse. My ears rang from the strike. The entire room of 500 guests fell dead silent. The music stopped playing. The waiters froze, holding trays of caviar. For a second, I thought someone would help. I thought surely some in this room of educated people would condemn a man for hitting his wife in public. I was wrong. The silence broke with cruel whispers directed at me. The socialites and arrogant businessmen muttered behind their hands. A woman at the next table whispered that I deserved it for humiliating him. An older man muttered that working-class girls just do not know how to behave. Chloe let out a disgusted sigh, rolling her eyes at me on the floor. They weren't horrified by his violence. They were horrified by my disobedience. In their twisted world, a husband hitting his wife was fine if she dared challenge his authority. Julian loomed over me, breathing like a wild animal, chest heaving in his tuxedo. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. His voice dripped with venom. "You are crazy," he hissed, the sound cutting through the quiet room. "How dare you bite the hand that feeds you? Without this family, you are nothing. You and your pathetic grease monkey father would be starving right now. You are a charity case, Maya. Just a mechanic's daughter who got lucky. We gave you everything, and you ruined it. I knelt on the cold floor, listening to his tirade. I felt a metallic tang in my mouth. I touched my lip. My fingers came away stained with blood. He had split my lip open. I looked at the red on my skin, then at the man I had spent 5 years with. I had tried to see the good in him. I had tried to believe he was just pressured by his father. But seeing him bask in his own cruelty, I felt nothing. No love, no obligation. I didn't shed a tear. I didn't beg. I wiped the blood away with my hand and stood up slowly. I smoothed my black evening gown, raised my chin, and locked eyes with him. My gaze was dead. I looked at Julian not as a husband, but as a corpse, like a bug waiting to be crushed. The smirk on his face faltered when he saw there was no fear left in me. I grabbed my phone from my bag. Time to show Harrison and his shallow family that I wasn't just some pathetic mechanic's daughter. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He dialed my father. He picked up on the first ring. "Dad," I said, voice steady. "Get ready to drop the hammer." He hung up. He knew the drill. We had planned for this moment for months. Harrison let out a loud, mocking laugh, making sure every investor in the room saw him perform. "She just called her daddy," he shouted. "Is he going to drive his rusty truck to the Ritz to fix my car?" A few sycophants giggled. But then, a firm hand touched my arm. It was Donovan, Caroline's husband. He was a brilliant surgeon and the only person in the room with a backbone. He stepped in front of me, shielding me from Harrison. "You okay, Stella?" he asked, his eyes scanning my split lip. Harrison turned red. "Back off," he spat. "This is family business. Don't interfere, you pathetic freeloader. You should be fetching my drinks, not standing here." Donovan didn't flinch. He stood tall, towering over Harrison. The smirk vanished from my husband's face as Donovan took a slow, heavy step forward, forcing him to stumble back. Everyone knew this family looked down on Donovan. They smiled at him in public, but mocked his Detroit roots in private. They resented that he was black, self-made, and far more successful than they could ever be. "Freeloader?" Donovan repeated, his voice razor-sharp. Caroline gasped. "Let's get something straight. The only reason your sister wears that diamond necklace is because I work 60-hour weeks in the operating room. My salary pays the mortgage on that mansion she claims she bought. My money covers her luxury cars and shopping because her trust fund died years ago. Don't ever talk to me about freeloading while you live off my work and Stella's genius. Move before I forget my oath and break your jaw." The ballroom went dead silent. Caroline looked humiliated. Winston looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Donovan knew exactly what it felt like to be used by these monsters. I gave him a small, grateful nod. "Thanks, Donovan," I whispered. "But I can walk out on my own. Take care of yours." I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked sharply against the marble. No one stopped me. Security parted like the sea. I pushed through the brass doors and stepped in the cool air. Valet attendants were everywhere. Suddenly, the hotel door swung open. Harrison followed, unable to let me have the last word. "Run," he yelled. "You will be crawling back for bus fare by tomorrow. Nobody wants a damaged liability like you." I ignored him, staring at the street. A moment later, a deep engine rumble shook the air. This wasn't a pickup. A midnight Brack armored Rolls. Royce glided to the curb. 4 massive men in suits stepped out with precision, forming a wall between me and the staff. One guard opened the door, bowing low. I slid in the leather interior without a second glance. Through the tinted glass, I saw Harrison frozen on the steps, his mouth hanging open. He was busy convincing him I had just thrown a tantrum and booked a fancy car to spite him. He had no clue that Via belonged to the man he had just insulted. He had no idea the trap was snapping shut. Morning light hit my hidden Tribeca penthouse, a place Harrison didn't even know existed. I stood in the kitchen sipping coffee. My face dropped where he hit me, but my head was clear. My phone buzzed on the granite counter. It had been vibrating since dawn. 40. 2 missed calls. 60 texts, all from Harrison. He unlocked the screen to a mix of arrogance and threats. He was desperate to feel in control again. "You are finished." The first one read, "I called the bank. Every joint account is frozen. Your name is off everything." The next text said, "I canceled your cards. Don't bother trying to use the platinum card, it will decline, and you will look like the broke trash you are. I also told building security to throw your clothes in the alley." He was losing his mind. "You thought you could humiliate my father? You are nothing without my last name. Start looking for waitress jobs." Then, a message popped up from Caroline. She wanted in on the bullying. "I hope you kept your old mop," she texted. "Time to scrub toilets to pay your loans. Don't dream of getting a cent of our fortune. We will bury you in legal fees. You are dead to us, you gold digger." I laughed. They were so blinded by their own ego they couldn't see the tidal wave coming. Caroline thought I was after money. She had no clue her father was drowning in $300 million of toxic debt. She didn't know those student loans they mocked were a total lie. 5 years ago, I wanted to see if Harrison loved me or if he was just another vulture. I faked a middle-class background. He failed the test, but I was in love. Now, watching them fight to protect a crumbling empire was hilarious. Harrison thought he was destroying me by freezing $200,000. He had no idea what was actually coming. I put my mug down and opened my phone. I didn't write an angry reply. I didn't beg. I just typed one character and hit send. A thumbs up emoji. A cheerful thumbs up to acknowledge his desperate rant. I knew the silence would drive his narcissistic brain crazy. Giving him zero energy was the ultimate insult. I tossed the phone aside and walked to the master bedroom. I pressed my hand against a hidden wall panel. A blue light scanned my thumb, and a safe clicked open. Inside, resting on encrypted bonds, was a thick manila envelope. I pulled it out, untied the string, and opened the document. It was the prenup. 5 years ago, Winston had thrown this at me across his desk. He threatened to disown Harrison if I didn't sign. Winston was terrified a poor girl would take half his real estate empire. He demanded the strictest separation of assets. What is yours is yours. What is mine is mine. No support. If we split, we keep what we brought in. Harrison signed it with a smirk, thinking he was safe. I ran my fingers over the bottom. Winston built a wall to keep me out, but he actually handed me a shield for my own $2 billion trust fund. They wanted me to leave with nothing. I was more than happy to oblige. The elevator opened to the top floor of the city's most ruthless law firm. The office smelled like mahogany and sheer authority. He walked past the desk as his assistant led me in. Bradley was waiting. He was a legal shark, charged $1,000 an hour, and never lost. He handled tech moguls and old dynasties. Today, he represented me against the family who thought I was broke. I dropped the heavy envelope on his desk. He didn't touch it, just smirked and turned his monitor my way. "Your husband is loud," he said, adjusting his glasses. "He has been emailing my firm all morning. He hired some cheap lawyer to send a demand letter. He wants a forensic audit and a cut of marital assets." Bradley started reading. Harrison sounded desperate. He claimed I manipulated his family and demanded half my savings. He even threatened to sue for emotional distress if I didn't sign a lopsided settlement by Friday. Bradley finished reading and threw his head back, laughing. I joined in. The audacity of Harrison demanding cash while his firm sat on $300 million of debt was a joke. "Let him dream," Bradley chuckled, wiping a tear. "Let him hire every bargain lawyer in the city. The document you brought is the finest piece of legal sabotage I have seen in 30 years. He flipped to the end. We had reviewed these terms before the wedding. 5 years ago, Winston trapped me in his office, slamming this contract down. He was terrified a Canuck's daughter would steal his real estate empire. So he paid for the harshest terms possible. The clauses were brutal. All pre-marriage assets were protected. It strictly waived any right to alimony or asset splitting, no matter the length of the union. Neither of us could touch a penny of the other person's fortune. What is yours is yours. Total separation. Winston forced my signature with a sneer, thinking he was protecting his son from a gold digger. He had no clue he was locking away my personal wealth. Harrison and Winston only saw my father as a mechanic. They never knew my late mother was the heiress to a massive logistics empire. She left everything to me in an ironclad trust. I kept my $2 billion fortune secret because I wanted to be loved for me, not my bank account. I wanted a normal life away from the superficiality that ruins so many wealthy clans. By forcing that predatory prenup on me, Winston legally blocked his own son from touching a single cent of my inheritance. Without it, Harrison might have claimed my assets grew during the marriage. He could have dragged me through years of litigation. But Winston's greed protected me. The weapon they designed to ruin me was now shielding my massive fortune from their hands. "I want a countersuit today," I told Bradley, leaning back. "Do not ask for Penny. Finalize the divorce exactly as the prenup says. Give Harrison what his father demanded 5 years ago. He leaves with his assets. I leave with mine." Bradley flashed a predatory grin. "I will have the filings to the court by noon," he said, typing quickly. "His lawyer will get our response by tonight. I would pay to see his face when he realizes his threats are useless." The legal divorce was over before it started. The real war was just beginning. This was about their social status and their empire. I opened an encrypted channel to my father's acquisition team. As we have been tracking Winston's failing real estate company for months. The $12 million tax error I found last night was just the start. They were bleeding cash, desperate for a private equity firm to bail them out of a $300 million hole. I called the lead manager at my father's firm. "Speed up the timeline," I ordered. "Winston will be panicking after last night. He needs a lifeline. I want our firm to be the only one buying that debt. Ensure every other bank denies their loan applications. Corner them. Consider it done," he replied. "We already started the debt purchase. By tomorrow morning, we will own the rights to their entire $300 million portfolio. We would be their sole creditor." I looked out at the skyline. Harrison thought he could slap me and face zero consequences. Winston thought he could humiliate my father. They were about to learn a lesson about true wealth. I was going to systematically dismantle their world and serve it on a platter. I stepped in the corporate lobby of my father-in-law's firm. For 5 years, I had walked through these doors, suffocating in suits, keeping my head down. Today, I wore a simple sweater and jeans. I was here to retrieve one item, an encrypted USB drive I left taped under my old desk. That drive held the final pieces of their fraudulent accounting. I needed it to finish the acquisition. The marble lobby was bustling. As I walked past the desk, the atmosphere shifted. Whispers erupted among the staff. News of the disastrous gala had traveled fast. People stared at my casual clothes and bruised cheek, assuming I was a defeated woman begging for her job. I ignored them, keeping my eyes on the elevator. Before I could reach the turnstiles, the silver doors slid open. Harrison stepped out. He was not alone. His arm was wrapped tightly around his lead secretary, Vanessa. She was a woman who spent 2 years glaring at May during office parties. Now she was draped over my husband in the lobby. They paraded their affair, dying to prove that Harrison had upgraded. He spotted me at security, his smirk morphing into a cruel grin. He let go of his girlfriend just to point at me, making sure the lobby watched his pathetic act. "Look who crawled back," he bellowed across the marble. "I told you that you wouldn't last a night out there. Look at her, Vanessa. Can't even afford a decent suit. Packing your cheap office supplies. Stella, grab some boxes from the dock. You will need them for the park bench tonight." Vanessa let out a shrill, grating laugh that echoed off the glass. She pressed herself against his expensive jacket and looked me up and down with pure disgust. "I told security to toss your trash out," she sneered, stepping closer to gloat. "But Harrison is too generous. He said you should carry your own junk so you feel the weight of your failure. True pathetic. You thought you could bleed his family dry and walk away. You are a nobody now." I stood still, watching their little display. I felt zero heartbreak seeing my husband with her. Honestly, I just felt sorry for them. They were like winners standing on a sinking ship. Vanessa reached up to fix Harrison's lapel, and the lobby lights caught the heavy metal on her wrist. A brand new diamond Cartier watch. That thing retails for $40,000. She noticed me inched her arm forward and thrust her arm forward to make sure I saw every car at. Like it? She bragged, her voice dripping with vanity. Harrison bought it this morning to celebrate his freedom. He said a real executive needs a real woman. Not some charity case in discount rags. I looked at that flashy watch and smiled. The sheer stupidity was almost impressive. I knew how Harrison operated. He did not have 40,000 in cash lying around. He definitely put that watch on the corporate credit card. The same account had been tracking for months. Harrison puffed out his chest, clearly missing the point of my smile. Go ahead and cry, he taunted, leaning against the security gate. You are looking at the life you could have kept if you just knew how to be quiet. Now grab your things and get out before I call security. I did not raise my voice or snap back. I just pulled my black access card from my pocket. It was a master key from the risk team, a key Julian did not even know existed. I tapped it against the elevator scanner. The light turned green and the gate opened. Julian frowned, his smug look faltering. How is your card still active? He demanded, his voice cracking. I told them to wipe you. I stepped past the gates and hit the button for the lift. As the doors opened, I turned back to face them. I locked eyes with the diamonds on Clara's wrist. You should hold on to that watch, Clara, I said, my voice cutting through the lobby. It is a beautiful piece, and since he definitely put it on the corporate card this morning, you should cherish it. It is literally the only thing the bank will not seize by next week. Julian went pale as the math hit his brain. He opened his mouth to scream, but the silver doors slid shut, cutting him off. I stood in the quiet lift, heading up to grab the final nail in their corporate coffin. I stepped off and walked briskly down the hall. Nobody moved. Nobody made eye contact. I reached my old cubicle, the corner they hid me in to keep me from their board members. I knelt on the carpet and felt under the desk until my fingers hit the tape. I ripped it away, grabbing the encrypted flash drive I had hidden months ago. This tiny thing held the unredacted transaction logs. It had the routing numbers for the offshore accounts. Julian used to hide his failing deals. It proved every bit of the corporate fraud he committed to fund his lifestyle. I tucked the drive into my pocket. My mission here was done. I avoided the lobby. I had no interest in seeing them again. I used my master key to reach the maintenance corridor. This concrete hallway connected to the adjacent tower, a skyscraper my family trust actually owned, though Julian never knew it. I took the freight elevator to the roof. The freezing wind whipped my hair as the doors opened. A matte black helicopter idled on the pad, its rotors slicing through the cold morning air. The pilot nodded as I buckled into the leather seat. Within seconds, we lifted off, leaving Julian's crumbling empire far below. I looked out at the Chicago skyline, laid out like a chessboard. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a cold, calculating calm. I was not the submissive wife anymore. I was a predator returning home. We were heading straight for the financial district. The helicopter banked hard and descended toward a monolithic glass tower at the tip of the island. This tower was the headquarters for my father's private equity firm. A ruthless firm that specialized in swallowing failing businesses, stripping their assets, and selling the remains for massive profit. The skids touched down on the roof. 2 security contractors met me and escorted me to the private lift. We dropped rapidly to the penthouse. We walked into the suite. The far wall was solid glass, offering a view of the harbor that took your breath away. Sitting behind a massive desk of petrified wood was my father, Alexander. If Julian had walked in right now, his brain would have melted. My father was the most feared titan in the industry, controlling billions in global assets. He had the power to sink countries if he wanted. Yet here he was, wearing gray sweatpants, a worn flannel, and scuffed work boots. He was happily eating a greasy cheeseburger, with a stack of corporate takeover files sitting next to his takeout bags. He wore that same outfit the day he helped me move 5 years ago. That was the day Julian first met him. Because he had grease on his hands and wore cheap clothes, my in-laws labeled him a lowly mechanic. They were so blinded by their own classism and need to feel superior that they never ran a background check on the man whose daughter was marrying into their family. If they had spent 5 minutes on research, they would have known the man they mocked could buy their entire portfolio with his loose change. Dad wiped his hands, smile beaming, until he saw my face. The purple bruise from Julian was impossible to miss. Silence flooded the office. Dad did not yell. The most dangerous men never do. He just leaned back, eyes locked on the proof of my husband's violence. I watched him calculate their ruin. He pulled a file from his desk and slammed it down. Debt acquisition protocol. He looked at me, cold as ice. I will make them pay for every ounce of pain, he vowed. I dropped the flash drive on his desk. This is the kill shot, I said. Every hidden account, every lie from the last 5 years is here. Dad plugged it into his terminal. Monitors flickered to life, bathing the office in a harsh blue glow. We analyzed the wreckage of my father-in-law's legacy. It was worse than I thought. Arthur projected an image of wealth, but his foundation was rotting. A waterfall of red numbers flooded the screen. $300 million in bad debt, a ticking time bomb ready to crush them. I pointed to the offshore shell companies. That is Julian's work, I explained, and voiced steady. While Arthur played socialite, Julian played visionary. He dumped millions into ghost projects that never broke ground. They handed cash to contractor who vanished. To cover the losses, they took out massive high-interest loans. They built a skyscraper on a swamp. Dad laughed, scanning the monumental stupidity of men who dared hurt his daughter. He scrolled to the maturity dates. The final deadline, less than 72 hours. Arthur is begging banks for a bridge loan. Dad noted, leaning in. He needs a savior before Friday. If he defaults, the banks take everything. The headquarters, the penthouse, the cars, it all goes to auction. I stared at the carnage. Arthur needed that anniversary gala to fake stability and land a bailout. He had no clue the only person with $300 million to burn was sitting here. Dad turned his chair, eyes wild with the thrill of the hunt. The banks are terrified, he whispered. They want this debt gone before it ruins their own books. If we move now, we buy it for pennies. I looked at the screen, picturing Julian slapping me, hearing his mistress laugh as they told me to get out. They wanted to treat me like a charity case? Fine. Time to show them real power. Do it, I said. Buy every single note. I want the rights to their empire by the end of the day. Dad grinned and grabbed his secure line. He barked orders to his brokers, demand a swift, silent acquisition of their entire debt portfolio. 4 minutes later, it was done. The banks dumped the toxic debt onto us with pure relief. I looked out at the city. The trap was shut. I was now their biggest creditor, the one holding the keys to their life. Across town, their mansion was a pressure cooker. Arthur sat at his desk, knuckles white, clutching his phone. He had just hung up the phone. His last hope was gone. The bank rejected his plea for more time, citing his cookbooks. The empire was buckling. Julian paced the rug, hands shaking, terrified of losing his status. Julian was sweating through his suit. Suddenly, the study doors flew open. Veronica stormed in, face flushed, waving a useless credit card. She had just been humiliated at a luxury boutique. She tried to buy a $30,000 bag, but her card was declined. The bank had locked her out. She marched right up to her husband, shoving the card at his chest. She screamed for his personal accounts, desperate to go back and buy that bag to prove she wasn't broke. Simon stood nearby, watching the family he married into completely unravel. Simon looked at her with clinical detachment. As a top trauma surgeon, he spent his days fixing broken hearts, but he could not fix this toxic marriage. For years, he ignored their snide remarks about his modest roots, hoping to keep things stable for their son. But today, the act fell apart. Simon refused to fund her reckless spending while her family played with illegal accounting. Veronica exploded, showing the ugly, prejudiced side she usually hid. She shrieked that he owed them his life. She insisted that marrying into their elite family was the only reason a kid from the South Side ever made it. She demanded he empty his accounts to save her father's crumbling firm, calling him a bottom feeder. Her brother Julian chimed in, ordering Simon to show some respect. Simon just stayed quiet, looking at Veronica. He did not see his wife anymore. He saw the same cruelty they had inflicted on his sister for years. He finally saw the truth. To them, he was just a checkbook. If he stayed, they would drag him down and ruin his career. Without a word, Simon turned away and left the study. He pulled out his phone and messaged a ruthless divorce attorney, demanding an emergency filing for sole custody and a freeze on all their shared assets. Was done with their bankrupt. Simon was done with their games. Back in the study, panic was setting in. Winston, the father, was pouring a drink when the old rotary phone rang. The sharp sound cut through the shouting. Winston Sound grabbed the receiver, expecting a debt collector. Instead, a senior director from a massive private equity firm was on the line. Winston exhaled, his face shifting from sickly pale to flushed relief. The lead investor confirmed they bought the entire $300 million debt load. They were even throwing in a cash infusion to rescue the real estate firm. They wanted a meeting at headquarters tomorrow to finalize everything. Winston slammed the receiver down, letting out a primal roar. He screamed that they were saved. A mystery billionaire had finally swooped in. Marcus started gloating, conveniently forgetting he was broke 10 minutes ago. Caroline was already busy ordering designer bags online. Winston ordered his team to prep a red carpet. They were ready to kneel before the man who just saved their legacy. The family celebrated, totally clueless. Their savior was the man they mocked and the daughter. In-law they discarded. In a downtown high-rise, I watched my legal team gather around a glass table. It wasn't a meeting, it was an execution. He sat at the head, backed by New York's top litigators, ready to dismantle their dynasty. The room felt freezing, a sharp contrast to the heat coming. Foreclosure papers were stacked deep. My firm spent hours auditing every cent of the debt we just bought. We weren't just buying their debt, we were building a cage. I signed the final authorization, nodding to my lead attorney. Block every exit, I ordered, my voice sharp. The moment Winston signs, I want acceleration clauses to trigger if he misses a single payment. Put liens on everything. File injunctions against Marcus' private accounts. They have played games for 5 years tonight. We seal every loophole. The team clicked away, freezing offshore accounts and seizing the luxury cars. We were cutting their air supply. No bridge loans, no bailouts, nothing. Winston and Marcus were likely dancing on a trap I personally set. My secure phone buzzed against the table as the team finished their work. The screen lit up. A text from Marcus. His arrogance was predictable. I opened it, a sloppy, boastful mess. We found a titan who sees our potential. He wrote, "Tomorrow, I will be richer than ever." He added a cheap jab about me being a loser rotting in the gutter. I stared, a cold smile touching my lips. Marcus was so delusional he was bragging to his executioner about the trap she built. He actually thought some mystery billionaire was handing him a fortune out of kindness. He had no clue the titan he was bowing to was the guy he called a grease monkey. And he had no idea the person holding the Pinto, his ruin, was the woman he physically struck yesterday. My fingers hovered. A weaker person might send a nasty reply. I knew better. Silence is power. I shut the screen, letting the silence swallow his ego. I stood, nodding to my team. The trap was set. The documents were weaponized. And the stage was ready. I took the private elevator to my penthouse. Time for the final act. I stepped into my walk-in closet. Rows of designer clothes glowed. For 5 years, I had dressed to disappear. I wore muted tones and sensible shoes to play the modest wife. He kept my presence small to protect his fragile ego. That era ended today. Tomorrow, I wasn't entering headquarters as a submissive spouse or an analyst. He was returning as an apex predator on Wall Street. I skipped the conservative rack and walked to a garment bag. He unzipped the canvas, revealing a masterpiece of power tailoring. It was a custom midnight blue suit, sharp, lethal, and cut with absolute precision. The shoulders screamed authority. I traced the lapel. This was armor. It was proof of the $2 billion empire I kept hidden. I paired it with a silk blouse and Louboutin heels. That flash of red would be the last thing he saw as E ruined his company. I held the jacket in the mirror. The bruise on my cheek was still visible, a violent reminder of the disrespect endured. I could hide it, but I refused. I wanted them to see that bruise while I stripped them of everything. The game of hiding was over. Tomorrow, the hunt begins. The morning sun glared off the headquarters facade. Inside, the lobby felt electric with unearned victory. A red carpet stretched across marble floors to the elevators. Board members stood in nervous clusters, sipping champagne, exhausted from bankruptcy rumors. Today, they were forced to celebrate. Harrison stood in the center, soaking up the tension. He wore a charcoal bespoke suit and a tie that screamed new money. Holding champagne, he gestured grandly, spinning his web of delusion. He claimed full credit for the financial rescue. He looked the investors in the eye, lying about his negotiation skills. "I know this market," Harrison bragged, his voice echoing, while others panicked. He claimed he worked back channels. He told them he reached out to an exclusive fund. "These billionaires don't hand out $300 million to just anyone," he said. "They look for visionaries." The board nodded, swallowing his lies because they were terrified. They praised his genius, blind to the fact that his own projects caused the collapse. Beside her brother stood Caroline. She wore a vibrant dress and a smile so fake it looked ready to crack. She was ignoring the embarrassment she suffered at the boutique yesterday. Her goal? Flatter her father and brother to get her bank accounts reinstated. "You are a genius, Harrison," she cooed. "I told my husband, Donovan, that my brother would save the family legacy. It takes a real man to pull off a deal like this." When a board member asked about her surgeon husband, Caroline sighed. "Oh, Donovan," she complained. "He claimed he was stuck in surgery. He always chooses the hospital over us. He never understood high-level finance anyway." She was dead wrong. Donovan was not in surgery. At that moment, he was sitting in a high-rise legal office. He wore a sharp suit and held a very different instrument. He gripped a heavy pen, signing a stack of expedited divorce papers. His team had secured an order freezing his personal accounts so Caroline could not touch a cent. He was also signing for sole custody of their son, citing her negligence. Donovan was surgically excising the tumor of this family from his life. Winston paced, checking his gold watch. He was salivating at the thought of meeting the private equity titan. He had photographers ready to capture the handshake. Winston needed the press to document his comeback. "Look sharp, everyone," Winston barked. "The motorcade is 2 minutes away. When the chairman arrives, I want absolute perfection. We must show them why we are kings of real estate. Harrison, button your jacket. Caroline, stand up straight. This is our legacy." The rumble of engines vibrated through the glass. A gas rippled through the board. Outside, traffic stopped as a convoy of 3 imposing vehicles pulled to the curb. It was a fleet of midnight black Maybach sedans, gleaming aggressively. The lead vehicle stopped at the red carpet. The armored cars radiated an aura of terrifying wealth. Winston and Harrison shoved each other as they bolted through the doors. They stood side by side, and straightening ties, straightened on sicken and passing on sickening, sycophantic smiles. They were ready to bow down. The Maybach door hissed open. 2 massive security pros moved first, scanning the area before flanking the car. Arthur and Julian vibrated on the curb, desperate, fake smile plastered on their faces. They were ready to worship whoever stepped out. A polished leather shoe hit the pavement, followed by the imposing billionaire. Julian stepped into the lighter. Seeing into the light instantly silenced the street. He was pure corporate muscle. The grease, stained rags from 5 years ago, gone. In their place, a custom Armani suit draped perfectly over broad shoulders. A white shirt popped in a navy silk tie. A platinum watch gleamed a subtle flecks of wealth. His silver hair was slick, and his posture radiated the kind of authority only forged in high stakes finance. Arthur shoved his son aside to reach the Titan, bowing his head in total pathetic submission. "Welcome to our headquarters," Arthur gushed, his voice trembling with eager sycophancy. "I am Arthur, the founder, and this is my son Julian. We are honored to have you. No words can express our thanks for this investment in our legacy." Julian didn't smile. He stared down at Arthur's outstretched hands for an agonizing moment for offering a brief bone-crushing handshake. He locked eyes with Arthur, then turned to look at the room. Irony was suffocating. Two arrogant men were groveling at the feet of the very guy they had mocked for half a decade, but their classism blinded them. They could not see past the Armani suit, the Maybachs, and the $300 million lifeline he carried. The canic they once crushed had been erased by their own greed. "Lead the way," Julian commanded, his voice a deep baritone that left no room for debate. Arthur and Julian scrambled to lead him down the red carpet. As they hit the lobby, the board broke into applause. Elena clapped the loudest, flashing a practiced fake smile. Julian ignored them. Didn't look, didn't wave, didn't slow down. He cut through the room like a man heading to his own funeral. They rushed him to the executive elevator, hitting the 50th floor. The ride was agonizing. Marcus and Julian filled the air with bragging about assets, but Julian stayed silent. He just watched the floor numbers climb, his heavy silence crushing their ego. The less he said, the more they panicked. When the silver doors slid open, they revealed their glass office. Julian walked straight to the head of the table, pulled out the lead chair, and sat down. He owned the room. Marcus didn't dare fight it. He took a side chair, desperate to keep the deal alive. His hands shook as he pulled a leather folder from his jacket. Inside were their restructuring conchs $300 million to save their skin. He slid the folder across the glass. Marcus placed a gold pen by the signature line. "Everything is ready," he said, his voice dripping with fake charm. "The board approved every term. Once you sign, the partnership is ours. We need your go-ahead." The room went silent. Julian's son leaned in, eyes fixed on that pen. Julian studied the pages, then the pen. He raised his head, locking eyes with a sweating Marcus. He didn't reach for the pen. Instead, he pushed the folder back. "I am not the chief executive," Julian said, the room turning ice cold. "I am only the board chairman. I do not handle daily deals. The person with the real power, the one who actually holds your future, is walking in right now." The double doors swung open with a violent bang. I stepped inside, not as a broken wife, but as the industry shark I actually am. My navy-tailored suit felt like armor. My white silk blouse was sharp, and the red soles of my heels clicked with every power step. I kept my head high. The purple bruise on my face was plain for everyone to see. I didn't hide the violence my husband used on me last night. I wore it like a scar, proving he failed to break me. He walked right up to Julian and put a hand on his chair. Marcus stared like he saw a ghost. His jaw dropped. He looked at my suit, then my posture, then at how Julian didn't even flinch. The man he thought he was tricking was sitting right next to the woman he spent years tormenting. Marcus broke the silence first. His face went bright red. He couldn't believe I was here. He shoved his chair back, the metal screeching. He slammed his fists onto the glass, shaking the water jugs. "What the hell are you doing here?" he roared, his voice cracking with rage. He pointed at my bruised face. "How did you get past security? I told them to toss you out. You have no right to be in this building." Marcus turned toward the doors. "Security!" he screamed. "Get in here. Drag this woman out now. She is having a breakdown because I finally left her." He spat. "Get her out before she ruined this deal." The board members panicked. Shareholder gripped their bags, watching the drama. They whispered about my bruised face, assuming I was an unstable ex trying to sabotage a billion-dollar buyout. They had no idea I was actually the one holding the axe. Two burly guards rushed in, lunging toward me. Marcus flashed a cruel smile, waiting to see me humiliated. But they never made it 5 feet. my own security team move with lightning speed. They formed a human wall of black tactical gear. In sync, they reached under their jackets. The sharp click of stun guns echoed through the office. Blue electricity crackled at the tips, buzzing with menace. The two corporate guards froze, hands raised, terrified of the trained professionals guarding me. The room fell into a paralyzed silence. Marcus stood there, mouth hanging open, watching as the billionaire's personal team held the room hostage. The electricity faded, but the threat remained. The guards backed away, and Marcus let his hands drop to his sides. His brain couldn't handle it. He looked at the investor, desperate for help. "Chairman, I am sorry," he stammered. "Is delusional. This woman is delusional. She is my estranged wife, and she is having a breakdown. Please let my security handle this." Alexander didn't blink. He unbuttoned his jacket with cold, deliberate calm. He reached for a heavy stack of files his team had placed on the table. These weren't bailout contracts. These were foreclosure papers my legal team finished last night. Alexander slammed the stack on the glass. The impact sounded like a gunshot. "You pathetic, arrogant vor," Alexander roared, his voice shaking the floor. "You dare call security to drag my daughter out? You threaten the CEO of my private equity firm?" A gasp sucked the air from the room. Elderly shareholders clutched their chests, faces pale with shock. Alexander turned his lethal gaze from Harrison to Winston. The older man trembled, knuckles white as he gripped his chair. "Tell me, Winston," Alexander demanded, his voice dropping to a deadly chill. "Still think my money is too filthy for your bank? 5 years ago, you treated me like dirt in your own home. Called me a grease monkey. Told your friends I was just an uneducated mechanic. Hands still too dirty to sign your checks?" Winston turned ghostly. He aged 20 years in an instant. His mouth hung open, gasping like a fish on dry land. The pieces clicked in his arrogant mind. Daughter. Mechanic. The billionaire standing before him. Winston remembered the man in work boots from 5 years ago. He overlaid that memory onto this titan in a tailored suit. The truth finally shattered his classism. The mechanic he mocked was the most ruthless kingmaker on Wall Street. The woman he let his son abuse was heir to a $2 billion empire. Harrison collapsed, knees buckling. He stared at the dark bruise on my cheek, the one he inflicted 12 hours ago. He realized with nausea that he hadn't just hit a submissive wife. He had attacked the city's most dangerous predator. His pride paralyzed him. He spent years bragging about business while tormenting the one person who held his life in her hands. My obedient mask finally cracked, leaving only cold reality. The quiet analyst in cheap clothes was gone. I stood tall in my midnight blue Tom Ford suit, radiating power. The board members shrank, terrified of the monster I had become. They saw my ice stare and knew their company was already a corpse. I wasn't here for a divorce settlement. I was the executioner coming for their heads. I stepped away from my father, moving with elegant grace. Each click of my heels echoed like gunfire. I circled the table, savoring the terror of the men who made my life hell. I stopped across from Harrison, pulled out a chair, and sat. I smoothed my trousers with supreme confidence. Resting my arms on the glass, he tapped my manicured nails. Tap, 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 a ticking clock counting down the final seconds of their miserable lives. I locked eyes with Harrison. His face was pure panic. Just no warmth left. "Hello, ex-husband," I said, voice sharp. "Ready for our meeting?" I didn't give him a second. I snapped my fingers. My lead accountant dropped 3 black binders on the glass. I slid the thickest one toward their leader. It hit like a gavel. "Open to page 1. I ordered. "This is the financial autopsy of your dying firm. Forget the fairy tales Harrison fed you. This is cold, hard math." The director opened it, scanning the pages. Within 10 seconds, he turned white. He pulled his glasses down, staring at the wreckage. "Let us start with that $12 million tax discrepancy," I said, pacing behind them. For 2 years, Winston Harrison cooked the books to hide losses from the IRS. They used offshore shells to funnel money out. I know because I am the risk analyst who cleaned up their messes to keep the feds away. Harrison jumped up, frantic. That is a lie, he shouted, pointing a shaky finger. You do not understand corporate strategy. You are taking things out of context. Don't listen to her. She is just an angry ex-wife with fake documents. I didn't raise my voice. I just tapped the second binder. Turn to page 47, he instructed. You will find the bank logs for his so-called visionary projects. The board flipped pages, panicked whispers erupting as they saw their capital listed next to fraudulent vendors. Those projects do not exist, I stated. They are ghost properties. Harrison poured $90 million of your money into empty lots. He paid premiums for expired permits. He wired millions to fake contractors who vanished. But the money did not disappear. It was rerouted into his personal accounts. The room went silent. Investors mapped the theft of their own wealth. He did not build skyscrapers, I said, my voice sharp as a razor. He funded a luxury life. He bought $40,000 watches for mistresses. He used your equity to lease jets. While his real estate empire rotted, he built a tower of debt on his own incompetence. The board erupted. These people were ruthless, and they hated being robbed. The room turned their rage onto Winston and Harrison. An investor slammed the table, screaming that he was calling the FBI. Another shareholder smashed his glass, demanded his money back. The polished executives turned in a mob. Harrison tried to shout over them, sweating and begging for a moment. He promised a buyout would make them billionaires by tomorrow. But his words were useless. The proof was there in black and white, his own forged signatures. His genius was dead. Winston sat paralyzed. He looked at the mob screaming for his arrest. He looked at the pile of evidence. Then he saw the $300 million debt notice. The reality crushed him. His decade legacy was gone. Winston realized with terror that the person holding the guillotine rope was the woman in the midnight blue suit. He slid from his chair, knees buckling. He moved toward me, hands shaking uncontrollably. The patriarch was gone, leaving a pathetic old man facing prison. Stella, please, he begged, voice cracking. He reached out, stopping short. You can't do this. You can't destroy everything I built. I stared at him with glacial eyes, letting the weight of his doom sink in. We are family, Stella, he pleaded, tears spilling. You were married to my son for 5 years. We took you in. I know we had issues, but you cannot throw your husband to the wolves. Please, I am on my knees. Just authorize the loan. Save our company. Save our company. Show mercy for the sake of your marriage. I looked down at the broken man. His terror was real, but it meant nothing to me. I stood up, smoothing my jacket. The room fell silent. You want mercy for a marriage your son ruined? I asked, my voice sharp. You plead for family after treating me like a maid for 5 years. You think these tears erase half a decade of abuse? You don't know family, Arthur. You only know power. I didn't reach for a pen. I didn't look at their bailout. I pulled a single document from my pocket bound in red, a death warrant. I slapped it on the table right over their fake ledgers. The paper landed hard. Read the bold print, I commanded. Arthur leaned forward, hands shaking, eyes locked on the ink. His breath hitched. It was a foreclosure notice. My firm didn't come here to sign a bailout, I said. We didn't come to save your failing empire. We bought your $300 million of toxic debt. We own every loan you have. And since you breached your covenants, I am calling the entire balance due. I am seizing this entire tower. I am kicking your greedy family out of the penthouse tonight. The weight of my words hit Marcus like a train. The executive who spent his life crushing people finally shattered. He realized he was broke. No mansion, no sports cars, no safety net. The sheer terror of losing everything broke him. Marcus let out a pathetic sob. He dropped to his knees, throwing his pride away. He clawed at the carpet, grabbing my legs like a cornered animal. "Sarah, please!" he whined, his voice echoing through the boardroom. You have to understand the pressure I was under. The stress was too much. That is the only reason I hit you. I swear, I never meant it. I love you, Sarah. Please, give me one more chance. Don't throw me out on the street. I looked down at the pathetic creature at my feet. 12 hours ago, he was laughing with his mistress about me being homeless. He felt no remorse, only fear. He was just a coward terrified that his accounts were finally locked. I felt pure, disgust rising. "Get your hands off me," he growled. I kicked him away, and he sprawled onto the floor, looking up with wide, frantic eyes. He raised his shaking hands, hoping his tears would manipulate me one last time. My father watched from the corner, a proud smile on his face. I stood tall, planted my heels, and swung. My palm struck Marcus S. with an explosive crack that rang through the room. The force sent his head snapping to the side, spraying his tears across the table. Marcus collapsed, clutching his stinging cheek. The board members gasped, but nobody moved to help. They just watched the bully get exactly what he deserved. My chest heaved with adrenaline. My hand burned, but reclaiming my life felt better than anything I had ever known. That slap was for every time you hurt me. My voice was cold and steady. "Don't touch me again. Don't speak to me again." I looked at the rest of his family. "You have 24 hours to pack your bags and get out. If you are still in my buildings by tomorrow, security will throw you out like trash." The elevator ride was silent, heavy with their defeat. When the doors opened, the lobby was a scene of chaos. Elena was waiting by the desk, looking for her father. Him for her father's. She saw him stumbling out like a ghost, while her brother nursed a swollen face. Her entitlement flared into unhinged rage. She locked eyes with me, her face twisting with hate. She stomped over, heels clicking, ready for a tantrum. "What did you do to them?" she shrieked, pointing a finger. "You psychotic gold digger. I will make sure my father's lawyers bury you, Sarah." I didn't flinch. I stood still, watching her humiliate hers. Her detachment from reality was fascinating. Before I could end it, the glass door spun open. The noise of the city rushed in, followed by Julian. He wasn't wearing his hospital scrubs anymore. He looked sharp in a charcoal suit, radiating power. Beside him was a stern man with a briefcase, the city's most ruthless divorce lawyer. Elena S.'s eyes lit up with toxic hope. She ran to her husband, missing look on his face. "Julian, thank God," she cried, grabbing his arm. "This woman is stealing my father's company. Wire the funds, now." "Dante, just stand there. Do something." Julian didn't reach out to comfort her. He looked at her with the cold precision diagnosing a disease. He nodded to the lawyer. He nodded to the lawyer. The man clicked his briefcase open and pressed the legal documents firmly into Elena S.'s chest. "You are officially served," Julian stated. His voice boomed across the lobby. "I am done being the bank for a family of parasites. For years you mocked me. You played nice for camera, but treated a top surgeon like trash. You drained my accounts for handbags because your own money dried up years ago." Elena stared at the papers, trembling in total panic. "Julian, what is this?" she stammered, her voice a thin, shaky whisper. "This is your permanent eviction from my life," he replied, his tone ice cold. "As of 8 this morning, my team secured an emergency restraining order. All our joint accounts are frozen. Your access to my income is gone. Those back cards you flaunt. Just worthless plastic now. You don't have a single cent of my money." Elena started hyperventilating. The reality of being destitute triggered a public breakdown. She looked wildly at Arthur and Marcus, but they were already broke. Julian leaned in, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I have filed for full custody of our son. You have no income, and you are neck deep in a fraud investigation tied to your father. You have no financial sense and zero moral character to raise a child. You see everyone, including your son, as a prop for your status. I will never let you poison his mind like your family poisoned yours." The weight of his words hit Elena like a wrecking ball. The arrogant princess shattered. She let out a blood-curdling shriek. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed, divorce papers scattering around her. She sobbed, begging him not to take her life away. She finally realized the truth. She was left with nothing. No wealth, no status, no husband, no son. She was bankrupt in every sense. Julian didn't look down. He buttoned his jacket, ignoring her weeping. He turned and locked eyes with me. We were two survivors who had walked through the same fire of their abuse. Julian gave me a slow nod of respect. It was a silent agreement between two people who had executed the perfect plan. He returned the gesture. Without a glance back at this mess on the floor, he walked in the crisp city air, leaving the ruined remains of that family behind. The weeks that followed moved with the speed of a derailment. I didn't just sink their real estate empire. I gave authorities the roadmap to bury them. 2 days after I seized their debt, federal vehicles swarmed their headquarters. Dozens of agents fled the floor, seizing files. Arthur was dragged out in handcuffs. His expensive suit wrinkled, his face pale with terror. The patriarch of the city's elite was indicted on 32 counts of fraud and tax evasion. The prosecutors, armed with the risk reports I had compiled and over 5 years, offered no deals and no mercy. The mountain of forged documents was so massive that the judge denied bail. Arthur was staring down 15 years in prison, stripped of his wealth and his status. He would spend his final years in an orange jumpsuit, miles away from the clubs he once ruled. His legacy was now just a cautionary tale. Marcus faced a different, more personal kind of destruction. The night he was thrown out, he stayed in a cheap motel with the last few dollars in his wallet. He foolishly believed his mistress would stay. He expected Vanessa to comfort his ego, assuming his charm could overcome his empty pockets. But women who date for luxury watches don't stick around when the counts hit zero. Vanessa took one look at his frozen assets, packed her bags, and walked out without a word. She didn't even leave a note. She pawned the jewelry he had bought her and vanished, leaving Marcus completely isolated. His identity was tied to his wealth. Without his bank accounts or his name, he was just an arrogant, hollow shell with a toxic reputation. The fall from a penthouse to squalor broke what remained of his mind. Within a month, Marcus was living in a filthy motel on the edge of the city. He survived on canned food and slept on a mattress that smelled of stale smoke and despair. He couldn't find work. The industry had blacklisted him like a disease. The golden boy of real estate was reduced to sitting in a call center for 10 hours a day. He wore a cheap polyester shirt and a plastic headset, reading a robotic script off a monitor. He spent his days cold, calling families, trying to sell insurance for pennies. Every time someone hung up, he was reminded of the power he had thrown away. His manager, a man 10 years younger, berated him for missing quotas. He was left with nothing, invisible to the elite that once worshipped him. The final blow came on a Tuesday. Harrison took a bus ride to his old neighborhood. He walked to the sprawling mansion he once paraded as his success. He stood on the sidewalk, shivering in his coat. He did not find a pristine estate. He found a massive construction zone. I had seized the deed and had zero interest in keeping a house poisoned by his memories. I ordered the total demolition. Harrison stood frozen as excavators roared to life. The iron claws cashed into the grand columns he boasted about. The bay windows shattered, raining glass on the driveway. The roof collapsed with a roar, sending gray dust into the sky. A rendering was posted on the fence where Harrison stood. It showed a new community center. The sign announced the site was becoming a foundation for low-income students, a calculated insult to his family's elitism. The money that funded his arrogant life was now educating the people he despised. Harrison watched the machinery grind his marble floors into rubble. The crunch of concrete mirrored his own life collapsing. A heavy pressure crushed his chest. He scanned the ruins of his fake empire. In that clear moment, his narcissism finally vanished. He realized with brutal certainty, he had not just lost a wife. He had held a priceless diamond for 5 years. He had possessed the brilliance of a woman who could have conquered the world by his side. Blinded by ego and a desperate need for control, he tossed that diamond away. Now she shone, while he sat in the cold, hollow wreckage of his life, 6 months since that disastrous gala. Tonight, my Chicago penthouse was a sanctuary of peace. Jazz played softly, and the skyline glowed, turning city grit into beautiful backdrop. I was no longer the invisible analyst or the corpse shark in a suit. I wore a simple silk dress. My spirit finally healed. The war that consumed my soul for 5 years, Over. I had won. The elevator chimed. My father, Marcus, stepped in with a vintage red. He swapped his work boots for loafers, and his sharp eyes softened the second he saw me. Beside him stood Elias, holding his young son's hand. Elias looked like a new man. The weight of toxic family dinners gone. He moved with the calm of a surgeon who had removed a tumor. Welcome home, I said, pulling them into a hug. Elias handed me his coat with a grin. I cannot thank you enough, Claire, he said. Your legal team was a godsend. Divorce finalized. I have full custody. Vanessa did not even show up to the hearing. She was too busy working double shifts at a diner to pay her legal fees. I led them to dinner. No intimidation, no arrogant patriarchs. No siblings counting the cost of the silverware. Just a roast, good wine, and people who respected each other. Marcus boomed with laughter as Elias shared stories from the hospital. No condescension, no fake talk. Marcus looked at Elias with real respect, a self-made man built on talent, not inheritance. We talked about my new foundation. The community center was rising on the rubble of his old estate. Dinner ended, and Marcus stood, raising his glass. To the most brilliant woman I know, he said, his voice thick with pride. I watched you shrink to fit a world that never deserved you. But you did not just break out of that cage, Claire. You dismantled it, building an empire from the scrap. To independence and the family we choose. To the family we choose, Elias echoed. I took a slow sip. The heavy burden of pretending was gone. I walked to the balcony, letting the crisp evening wind hit my face. It felt refreshing. I leaned against the railing. Below, the glowing arteries of the city pulsed through the streets. Millions were rushing, fighting their own battles, escaping their own cages. A peaceful smile spread across my face. I no longer wore a mask of mediocrity. I no longer bit my tongue for people who saw me as a charity case. Family is a sanctuary that respects your boundaries, not a prison. I burned down the fake empire that tried to bury me. I seized my $2 billion legacy. I took back my freedom. This story is about self-worth. We all make that mistake. We dim our light so we do not blind the insecure. We endure manipulation because we think blood ties require sacrifice. Her journey shatters that illusion. Her triumph did not come from money. Her true victory was realizing her dignity is non-negotiable. The takeaway? Last names do not give anyone the right to treat you like a disposable asset. A real family respects your peace and celebrates your authentic self. The ultimate revenge against toxic people is simply taking back your power and thriving without them. Never accept a seat at a table that demands you eat scraps. If you have ever walked away from toxic people to protect your peace, share your story in the comments and subscribe for more.